In my last FNAF Theory video, I talked about how I was confused about how the FNAF timeline can actually all work together. If you haven't seen the video, I'd recommend watching it, but the gist was essentially that the timeline of Into the Pit doesn't really make sense if it does take place in the games. There's a calendar in the game that lines up with 2018 and 2029, but no years in between. But with the storyteller taking place 40 years after 1979 and in 2019, and the Pizzaplex being built in the December prior yet not existing in the Stitch Wraith Stingers, which are after Into the Pit, the story must be in 2018, and yet, if FNAF 3 and FNAF 6 are in at the earliest 2015, the comment in Fright's Epilogue 5 saying the FNAF 6 fire was ancient history is really weird if it was only 3 years ago. And the graphic novel claims Into the Pit to be in the year 2020 or later, and with it being impossible for the Stitch Wraith Stingers to happen after the Pizzaplex, neither 2018 nor 2029, the only two options for the time placement of the story, are viable. So, what's the answer? Is the Stitch line just not connected with Tales or the games, or is there something else we missed? Join me as we take a deep dive into the truth behind the Into the Pit story. If you think about it, there are 3 different versions of Into the Pit. There's the original Fazbear Fright story, there's the Into the Pit game, and there's the interactive novel Return to the Pit. Hell, technically speaking, there's 4 if you include the graphic novel. Each version of Into the Pit is different in some way. The graphic novel is mostly the same as the original story, but at the same time it's still very different in terms of dialogue and smaller details. Return to the Pit also follows the same general plot as the original, even borrowing some of the same dialogue, but at the same time, there's a lot of individual plot lines like the arcade machine or the chip storyline that are completely new, plus all the different endings and some of the slightly altered story elements. I know the same can be said for the week before, since it is also in this format, but I feel like having Into the Pit, not only a Fazbear Fright story, but also a story that already has a game adaptation, in this format, where there are so many different endings and branched timelines, was a conscious decision. We didn't need an Into the Pit game. We surely didn't need an interactive adaptation, so the fact that we got both of them seems like it is trying to tell us something, and each version of Into the Pit suggests different numbers of dead kids, some strange timeline inconsistencies, and most importantly, different events happening entirely. One thing that struck me as interesting when it comes to the story's interactive adaptation is its title. It is called Return to the Pit, yet the actual story is just Oswald going into the pit like the original story. It is the same event, so why is it called Return? Sure, we've seen Into the Pit before, so it's a return for us, but it doesn't really make sense in terms of the actual plot. Oswald is going for his first time. He isn't returning, is he? In the Into the Pit game, there's one specific line of dialogue that I actually discovered recently after I had already come up with this whole theory, and found that other people were talking about it themselves, and also came up with the same idea completely separate from me. There's one ending in the game where Oswald decides to leave Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1985 because he is afraid. He ends up getting lost out there, and the game ends with him stranded in the past. After this, you can continue on in the same save, which will just bring you back to your last checkpoint. If you decide to go back to the front door of Freddy's and leave again...
I mean...
You saw what happened last time. Wait. Did you see that? It said...
mentioned last time, right?
Yeah.
Loop theory!
What do you mean last time, Oswald? Oswald will say, nope. You saw what happened last time, in reference to the previous ending. But this is from a checkpoint before you even did that, and this is in a timeline where you didn't get lost. That ending is Oswald getting trapped in the past, yet here he is fully able to go back to the present and isn't lost. The leave ending and the rest of the game cannot have happened in one continuous timeline. That is, unless he did already go through it. If you don't remember, in the 8th Fright's epilogue, Larson begins having visions of a ball pit. In Fetch, the agony-infested Freddy's location seemed like it was calling out to him. Paranormal stuff in FNAF has the ability to call out to people and lure them in. Oswald in Return to the Pit has a vision of the ball pit even when he chooses not to go anywhere near it, even before he goes to Jeff's in the first place. The pit is calling for him. However, this has precisely the opposite effect. The vision scares him away, making him choose not to go to the pit. And what happens? His life is completely ruined. His relationship with his dad is ruined, and there's a game over. It's telling us that Oswald literally has to go to the pit, and if he doesn't, it ruins everything for him. Therefore, next time he goes through this, he will make the right decision. It's also worth noting that Oswald begins the story drawing Freddy's characters before knowing anything about Freddy's. It's possible that these aren't meant to be the pit psychically connecting with him, but rather memories. As I said, in the game, he remembers a previous ending where he got lost. He has small memories of what happened before, so maybe he just remembers the animatronics. Think of it kind of like Bendy and the Ink Machine, where Henry goes through the same events over and over again, but things happen slightly differently each time, which we know because he actually leaves little messages for himself for the future times that he goes through them. So it's kind of like that. He remembers small things, but he still has to follow the same general plot. In Return to the Pit, Oswald can find parts of a Faz token, and when you go back through the book, you can use it on an arcade machine called 8-Bit Escape. But how does he still have this item when he got it in the future of the book, in a part Oswald hasn't even made it to yet? He doesn't even know how he has it, he just does. Admittedly, The Week Before does the same thing with the mobile phone, but the fact that this happens in this story too is definitely at least noteworthy, given the plot that seems to be being pushed on us. One timeline inconsistency I've noticed from Into the Pit is the fact that Back to the Future is already out in the story. Yet we know from the FNAF 1 newspapers that the missing children incident happened on June 26th. The movie Back to the Future came out in 1985, yes, but it came out in July, after the missing children incident already would have taken place, even though Chip and Mike had seen it before. But was this actually an error? Or is it meant to indicate that maybe the world Oswald is in isn't real? We've already kind of gathered by now that 1985 in Into the Pit is not the real world. It's a warped reality that is created by the pit itself based on the warped memories of the missing children incident. Into the Pit is not actual time travel. This was all confirmed in the 8th Fright's epilogue, revealing that in reality, Oswald is simply living through a memory that belongs to someone else. We also know from the actual story that the world is not how it should be. Oswald is walking around in his normal clothes and realizes that he has no tokens. Then suddenly, a bunch of them just appear in his pocket out of nowhere. That's a big sign that this is not the real 1985. But the Into the Pit game has Oswald take items between 1985 and his time. It has things from the 1985 Freddy's affect the present. In Return to the Pit, Oswald meets a grown-up version of Chip, who remembers him as Oswald. We know the story is not about actual time travel, yet the game and Return to the Pit treat it as if it is. What that seems to indicate is that Oswald is simply in the pit. Like, even when he's in his own time. When he gets in it for the very first time, he gets trapped in it, unable to escape. He goes in and out of the pit from his own perspective, but in reality, he is just trapped in the pit and unable to leave, going through a cycle, a time loop, that he is unable to escape. That's why every version of Into the Pit is different, and why there's so many different endings, not only in the game, but also in Return to the Pit. Each version of the story is its own loop. That's why each version of Into the Pit is different. There's also different timing for each one. In Return to the Pit, TikTok is mentioned when it's only July at the time, but also at an earlier point in the book, TikTok isn't mentioned. So it's kind of weird. It's as if the book is trying to tell us that these aren't just alternate paths, these are both paths that Oswald takes at different points in time, as if time is still passing for him, but he's just in the pit the whole time. There's a calendar in the Into the Pit game which matches the years 2029 and 2018. Another thing to note is that Musical.ly rebranded to TikTok on August 2nd, 2018, which is after the events of Return to the Pit, if it was to be in 2018 since it takes place in June. That means that one version of Into the Pit takes place in 2018, that being Return to the Pit, and another version takes place in a later year, that version also being Return to the Pit, just a different path. On top of that, there's the graphic novel version. While the graphic novel artists are given free will, the scripts are provided, meaning the year of the story being 2020 or later is intended, but that doesn't line up. Why are there multiple different versions of Into the Pit, and why do they take place at different times? Like I talked about in my last theory video, Into the Pit doesn't fit in 2018 because of the graphic novel, and it doesn't fit in 2029 because of the Pizzaplex being built before that, and the calendar prevents it from being anywhere else. It doesn't fit anywhere, but that's the thing. It doesn't fit anywhere because it isn't supposed to. There's no question of which version of Into the Pit is canon. All 4 of them are canon. They're just all different loops within the ball pit where Oswald is trapped in a time loop. And not only are all 4 different versions of Into the Pit canon, but also each and every different path and different ending is also canon. What I think is the thing that most heavily indicates that Into the Pit is a time loop is the fact that it isn't actual time travel. I think Oswald is literally just trapped in the pit where he is probably dead and experiencing the same thing over and over, while at the same time, time is still passing normally and he is still experiencing the normal world as it is, including all the progression from the outside world, like I said before, with TikTok being created after he already goes in, and then TikTok bleeds into his version of the world. Kind of like an Under Construction, where Maya is in a fake reality that is still a replica of the real world, and time still passes as usual. One thing people talk about, and that I mentioned earlier in this video, is how in the Into the Pit game, Oswald is able to bring items from the present into the past and vice versa, and sometimes things happen in the past that alter the future. Some say this indicates actual time travel, but I don't think that's necessarily true. It's clear that Agony is able to affect reality in other stories, so that doesn't necessarily matter much, but what does matter is how in Return to the Pit, Oswald quite literally changes the timeline. He plays the 8-bit escape game and literally goes back in time and prevents the missing kids from dying. That is not possible, because we learn in the 8th epilogue that Oswald is not actually time traveling. When he is in the pit, he is simply living through memories that don't belong to him. So like I said, maybe he just got trapped in the pit while doing that. And maybe he's actually been doing this for many, many years. In the 9th Frights epilogue, Larson learns that in the pit, there is blood on some of the balls, something even pointed out in Into the Pit where Oswald claims the balls to be sticky. Larson takes 30 samples of blood and sends them to be tested, where it is revealed that all 30 blood samples are from the same person, but the way the blood has aged indicates that it originates from 30 different years. The same person, for some reason, has been bleeding into the pit for at least 30 years. But what's weird, we literally never found out whose blood that was. So, if Oswald is trapped in the pit, in a loop, living through the same thing over and over again, and with time still passing as normal, is it possible that the blood is actually from him? Keep in mind, Oswald does get bitten on the arm in the story, so the blood could very well be the blood from his arm as a result of that wound. In that case, maybe at first, the memory was much more accurate. Return to the Pit does show it as 5 dead kids killed in a storage room, i.e. the safe room, but the original Into the Pit shows 6 dead kids and it happening in a private party room. We also know that Afton stuffed the kids as they were killed, and their bodies were never grouped together, meaning this is not accurate to the missing children incident. It's a possibility that the memory got more and more warped over time. Maybe that 6th dead kid is someone who died alongside the missing kids, but not a missing kid themselves. It's even possible that the kid is the one Oswald is experiencing the memory of. He is the 6th kid, but over time, as he is trapped in the pit for longer and longer, he begins to blend into the world, separating himself from the 6th kid, and then blending that 6th kid into the missing children incident. As he lives in the loop for longer and longer, his perception of it changes, and the memory grows more and more warped until it is barely recognizable. On top of that, there's a scene in Return to the Pit where Oswald finds himself aged over 30 years, now being in his 40s, but in the modern day. Perhaps this is meant to show that this is actually his real age, actually going into the pit around 1989 during the lifespan of the FNAF 1 location, and still being trapped in the pit for all this time, with his life progressing like The Simpsons, with his parents and his life adapting to the progressing times in the world around him even when he's in the pit. That, or Oswald went into the pit around modern day and is trapped in the pit for over 30 years from his perspective, while in the real world it's actually only a few years, like time dilation, in that one place is experiencing time at a different speed than another. It's a weird idea, but it kind of makes sense. Especially when you consider something we learn in FNAF World with the flip side, a false world, but a realm where what happens inside has an effect on the real world. This could be how the pit works, and although Oswald isn't in the real world, instead being trapped in the pit's false reality, him bleeding within the memory transfers that blood onto the real life pit, so it kinda makes sense. It's also possible Oswald in the Return to the Pit ending where he ages is actually seeing reality, with the first time he went into the pit and his father's reaction to his son's disappearance in the real world. Oswald is there as the aged up man because what happened inside affected the real world. This is much more speculative, but I can definitely see it being the case. There's some other little things too though. For example, on page 150 of Return to the Pit, Oswald learns that Gabrielle, grown-up Chip's daughter, goes to the same school as him, and they remark that they may have met there if it weren't for what was happening with the rabbit. Oswald wondered what would have happened in a different universe if he had just met her as a friend during a normal day under normal circumstances. That's also what happens in the original story, meeting her and her explaining some Greek gods and stuff and how they never give up, inspiring Oswald to face Spring Bonnie and save his dad. In a different part of Return to the Pit, he also does meet Gabrielle there, but on a swing rather than a bench like the original story. It's different. It's a small change, but it's weird how little things like that are changed. And the fact that Oswald actually thinks of the idea of what would happen in an alternate universe, and it's what actually happens on a different route, seems like a very heavy indication that each path into the pit is a different loop. Also, in Return to the Pit, when he plays 8-Bit Escape, Oswald finds himself in a 3D pixelated arcade game somehow, just like Princess Quest IV in Help Wanted 2. Want to know why that's important? Because the name of the Princess Quest music is literally Caught in a Loop. And on top of that, every time Oswald dies, he has to go through the entire game again, no matter what area of the game he died in, whether it's right at the end or right at the beginning. He is literally trapped in a loop until he saves the kids. That also explains why the Stitch Wraith appears in the Into the Pit game. Maybe the Into the Pit game is the final loop, or one of the final loops, and the Stitch Wraith is there because it's Jake, in the final epilogue, going around and trying to release all the spirits in the pit, and Oswald, still being trapped in there, even years after the epilogues are over, and when the Pizzaplex is up and running, is up next. But who knows? There's a lot of speculation to go along with this theory, and I'm curious to know your thoughts. Do you think Into the Pit is a time loop? Are you guys like me and saying Into the Pit so many times is making you feel like you're saying it weird? Let me know in the comments, and if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!